Between paying homage and straight-up copying, a lot of great titles have come from adding new mechanics to already existing games. But all this can backfire if you make a bad game. Sadly, Basement Crawl is as bad as I've seen in a very long time. Put politely, Basement Crawl is a blatant rip-off of Bomberman. This is far from a bad thing, as many of my favorite multiplayer experiences have come from different Bomberman installments. But as bad as some Bomberman games have been, and I'm looking at you, Bomberman Act Zero, none are as incompetent as this game. It brings me no pleasure when I tell you that Basement Crawl is the first truly god-awful game of this new generation. This PlayStation 4 game attempts to mix the simple gameplay of Bomberman with a modern-day horror film. The intro sets up a gruesome scenario involving a kidnapped woman, a key, and a bunch of monstrous characters itching to fight. But don't think you're gonna get any answers, because this Bomberman clone has no other story elements. It's just you blowing up the competition for points and bragging rights. Although it's an 8-player game, there are only 4 characters in Basement Crawl. You have a choice between a crash test dummy rolling around in a wheelchair, an overweight woman in full BDSM gear, a little person dressed as a clown, and a blindfolded girl carrying a knife-wielding bear. There's no rhyme or reason for any of these characters to exist, yet they do, and they're appropriately creepy. Lame, but certainly creepy. If you've played Bomberman, then you know what to expect from Basement Crawl. The levels are laid out in a recognizable grid, and players will set down bombs, traps, hoping to blow up the competition. There are boxes and other obstacles to destroy, which leads to a number of power-ups that are ripped right out of you-know-where. Outside of the spooky settings, Basement Crawl's only original contribution is a character-specific special attack. It's worth pointing out that this is a multiplayer-only game. There are no single-player missions, computer-controlled opponents, or tutorial stages to warm you up. You either play against a real person, or you play a different game. This can make learning the game a little tricky, as you're constantly being thrown into rooms where everybody else seems to know what they're doing. It took me at least a dozen attempts before I finally got the throw and kick buttons straight. This really is the worst way to learn how to play a game. Eventually you'll get the hang of Basement Crawl, and the frustration of starting out will be replaced with the anger of never knowing who you are on the screen. Like I said, this is an 8-player game with only 4 characters to choose from. No matter how you slice it, multiple people are going to have to choose the same characters. And without any kind of marker, it's incredibly easy to lose track of your Mad Bomber. As a multiplayer-only game, you might expect there to be an emphasis put on the unique modes and stages. Unfortunately, that's not the direction Blooper Team went when making Basement Crawl. There are only 2 modes, a free-for-all deathmatch and a team-based mode. Neither game type is especially original, and I quickly lost interest in both. Players earn points for leveling up, but that isn't enough incentive to keep you playing these 2 modes. Even if you can get past the lack of single-player content, paltry selection of game modes, and the stingy variety of characters, you're still stuck in a game that can't even get the basics of Bomberman right. Basement Crawl gets simple things wrong, such as getting stuck on objects and the bomb's awful collision detection. This game proves that it's harder than it looks to mimic Bomberman. Sadly, there's an even bigger problem that we haven't even touched on. In the first week of playing, I had nothing but problems connecting to Basement Crawl's server. I was constantly met with game crashes, rooms that wouldn't load, and other nasty technical bugs. There were times when it would take 5 or 6 attempts just to enter a room, often with at least 1 game crash mixed in. This is unacceptable. And just when you think you've successfully entered a room, you'll be hit with a brand new batch of bugs. Sometimes players won't be able to lay traps, while other times 1 or 2 people will enter the room long before anybody else. And did I mention that the game likes to crash and disconnect in the middle of heated matches? It's as if Basement Crawl is doing everything in its power to push me away. It doesn't help that the overall presentation is lacking. It's hard to believe this is a PlayStation 4 exclusive, as it barely looks like a PlayStation 3 game. The opening cinemas are easily the most impressive part, and even that is full of stuttering problems and ugly textures. From the art direction to the character models, I took little enjoyment at looking at Basement Crawl. It's easy to scoff at the game-breaking technical problems, but they aren't the real issue here. Even if the bugs were suddenly fixed, we would still be left with a Bomberman clone that doesn't even get the fundamentals right. Worst yet, it's ugly, has a serious lack of characters to choose from, and only 2 basic modes. It's also frustrating to learn, and a big step backwards from any other game in this genre. I know people are desperate for a new PlayStation 4 game, but I assure you, Basement Crawl is not the answer. Hey guys, let me add a little context to this review. As you can tell, this game was awful, and I certainly wasn't the only person to point this out. The game was so bad that the developer decided they needed to start over and release a brand new, rebranded version called Brawl. That game comes out tomorrow, and we'll be back to review it early next week. But what I wanted to do was put this review up so that you could compare the 2 versions. We still have new reviews coming, including Shovel Knight, Project Root, Ziggurat, and Shadowrun Chronicles. So do me a favor and subscribe to this channel and let me know what your thoughts are on Basement Crawl. Oh, and don't forget to come back next week and see if Brawl is any better than this garbage.